All eyes across the world have been in Walterboro all week as the trial has started, the double murder trial for Alex Murdaugh. It has been an incredible week of testimony. We wanted to break down everything that happened in court, so we brought our expert, former U.S. Attorney Pete Strom is with us today. Pete, thank you so much for the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And you just told me they are calling this the what? The
trial of the century in South Carolina.
Trial of the century in South Carolina. All right, let's get right into our first day of witnesses. The first person that they called was Daniel Green, who was with the Colleton County Sheriff's Department, and we saw the body camera, or jurors saw the body camera for the first time, unredacted body camera of the night. One of the things that Green said was that Alex wasn't crying on that body camera. And then he said, he doubled back and said, well, everybody's different. But what do you make of that, and what kind of impact do you think that had on the jury?
Well, you know, the way you start out a trial is the first person on the scene, because the jury needs to get into the case just like, as it develops. So they called this young guy to testify, and I thought he did a pretty credible job. You know, I think that the prosecution obviously is trying to show that he wasn't sympathetic. What was interesting to me is both sides spent a lot of time talking about how graphic it was. I mean, they were talking about the brains on the floor, and his brains were blown out, and you know, his head harpoon exploded like a watermelon. And you know, you got to think, why are both sides pushing that? I think the prosecution wants the jury to be angry about this. This is really a violent crime, and I think Harpootlian on his side wants the jury to think no father could do something this violent to his son and maybe to his wife. So they've got different motives, but they're both pushing that really heavily.
All right, and let's talk about that for a moment as we talk about how graphic the scene was. During the body camera video, we hear, even after Green has testified, and Chad McDowell testified as well, how graphic the scene was. But then we hear recording of Alex Murdaugh saying, so they're dead? You've confirmed that they're dead? To me, that was an odd moment.
Yeah.
What do you think the jury will make of that?
You know, it's hard to know. You know, none of us know how we would react in that situation. Sure. Are you going to cry? Are you going to panic? You know, I'd probably be scared that somebody was out there and they may kill me. I mean, so I'd have some concern about security. You know, so it's hard to know what the jury thinks. Beyond that, what is really interesting to me is during this jury selection, you know, they ask this entire pool whether you knew anything about it, and most of them said, yeah, they'd read something about it, talked about it, but none of them said that they'd formed an opinion about innocence and guilt. I think there's a big crowd of people who aren't telling all the truth, because this is the biggest thing that's ever happened in that county, biggest case in our state in years and years and years. And you know, these people all go to this little town square. This is a tiny community. And if you don't think everybody on that jury has had a conversation around their dinner table and come to some conclusion about his innocence or guilt, I think that's being naive. Hopefully they're going to keep their mind open as they should during the trial, but I find that interesting. Also find it interesting that they didn't sequester the jury.
And let's talk about that. For our viewers who don't exactly know that the way that works out, they have an option, both sides, the prosecution and the defense have an option to push for a sequestered jury and sequestered witnesses, meaning not only would the jury have to sleep at a hotel at night and be taken away from their families, but they would not be, the witnesses would not be allowed to watch each other testify, which really changes things. Why does that surprise you?
Well, you know, as far as the jury's concerned, this is such a serious case, and there's such an opportunity for influence. I mean, again, all these people live in this community, and if you go home this weekend and you're on the jury and you go to church and somebody in your congregation says, I hope you find that SOB guilty, or I hope you find that SOB not guilty, that the police are making all this up, you know, have you been influenced?
It's influence.
And, you know, this case costs so much money, it's so much, the stakes are so high in this case. This seems like they're taking a chance, not sequestering this jury. Now, why would the state not ask for it or the defense not ask for it? They don't want to make the jury mad, okay? Because I don't care who you are, you don't want to go spend 2-3 weeks at the Days Inn in Walterboro. So
away from your family.
Away from your family, yeah.
All right, I want to move on to the second witness that was called on Thursday. Chad McDowell, again with the Colleton County Sheriff's Department. There was a very tense exchange. One of the points that the defense has tried to make is about the tire tracks and the evidence. And were the tire tracks walked over? Who walked over the tire tracks? Who didn't preserve them? And that was what Harpootlian was pushing in this cross-examination. He got very testy, and there was a moment at which he really pushed this member of the Colleton County Sheriff's Department and said, well, do you know what your job is? What does the jury... Does that win you points with the jury, or does that hurt with the jury when you are hostile with one of your witnesses?
Well, I think, you know, Harpootlian in his opening statement, this is something we all say when you're introducing yourself to the jury. If I say something that offends you, please don't hold it against my client. Sometimes I get aggressive, sometimes I can be grumpy. Please don't hold that against me. You know, what Harpootlian is trying to do in this case, he doesn't have to win the case. He just has to have one juror think there's not enough evidence to convict. So he's trying to make whatever little point that he can make, okay? And so in this instance, there's this tire track that everybody saw who were first on the scene. Nobody took a picture of it, probably wasn't corded off, but that's not going to win or lose the case. But this is the first ding in Harpootlian just hitting their armor a little bit and saying, y'all didn't do it exactly right. All right, this isn't a big win, but you know, but he wanted to make that point, and that's what he's doing.
All right, 2 more questions for you. I want to go through 2 other witnesses. Angela Stallings was called to the stand. She's the 911 operator whose voice you hear now. You've heard from that call. On that call, Alex Murdaugh says, well, Paul's been being threatened lately. And a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of our News 19 viewers are saying he's already planting a seed of his defense on the call with this 911. Did you find that unusual? And how do you think the jury is going to read that moment? And then he repeats it again on the body camera to all of the Colleton County Sheriff's deputies at the scene. Repeats again, well, he's been being threatened because of this boating accident.
A cynical person would say that he planned this whole thing. Maybe he planned it for sympathy. I mean, his financial life was in a spiral. Maybe his marriage was in trouble. Who knows the truth of that? And that he was prepared to plant that seed that this who may have done it to get sympathy for himself. A cynical person may think that. On the other side, you know, he's a former prosecutor, volunteers down there, you know, pretty good lawyer. He knows that the police are going to be looking for suspects. So in your mind, I would be thinking, who would be mad enough at Paul, me, Maggie, my law firm, whatever, to come do this? Is this some kind of backwoods justice?
Gotcha. All right, and I want to talk to you about the last witness now, the most recent witness called on Friday, Laura Rutland. She is a detective with Colleton County Sheriff's Office. To me, just as a novice watcher, Pete, this was a bombshell moment. This was John Medders, of course, veteran trial attorney here in town, veteran prosecutor in town, and he said and was asking her, okay, so he said he told you, or that night he had said he moved the bodies, he touched the bodies, he took the pulses, he looked to see if they were alive. Was he clean? And this big moment in court came out, well, this was such a bloody scene, so graphic like they have described. Why did he not have blood all over him? And he really made that clear to the jury. What do you think of that moment?
I thought that was the most powerful moment in the case so far, through the opening statements and the first witnesses. You're right, John Medders is a pro. Attorney General's office did good work getting him back in there. And what you saw is, you know, if you're the prosecutor of this case, you got to be methodical, because what Harpootlian is going to do, you know, if you call the first guy to the scene and the second guy to the scene, and you don't call the third and fourth, then Harpootlian, when he closes, he's going to say, well, they didn't call the third and fourth person, and what may have they told you about this? So they're hiding things from you. So the state has to be methodical in putting these witnesses up, and that can be boring. Medders got up there, he set it up, and then he just hit it out of the park. And then the biggest flaw on the defense side is The judge called a break right then. Okay, so the last thing, go back and watch it. The last thing that jury heard before that 30-minute break was Meddar's cross-examination of Mr. Clean. How could you, and the jury's got to be thinking, he says he touched Paul twice, tried to roll him over twice. He went over to Maggie, he checked both of them's pulse. We've heard for 2 days how bloody the scene is, and here he is, and he doesn't have a lick of blood on anything. That sunk in. I mean, that's a foot fault on Harpootlian's part. He should have stood up, objected to something, tried to do something to, just like going in at halftime into a football game, you want your team to think that you're on the up. They went into that break on a down. Now, it isn't as bad as a 15-minute break, but boy, you don't ever want to end a day like that.
Absolutely. All right, last question, Pete. As we move into next week, there will be a whole slew of other witnesses called. That witness list is very long. What do you expect next week?
You know, it's hard to know. I think this is going slow. I thought the jury selection went very fast. Judge Newman just cut through all the motions that Harpootlian filed and said, we'll address those when they come up. We're not going to take 2 days, which is what they had planned to do pretrial motions. So I thought this thing was going to be a little ahead schedule. But again, they've kind of gotten in these rabbit holes, like on the tire tracks. And that's taken longer. So it's hard to know. I don't know whether, you know, they're going to try to go into the financial stuff next to show his motive, or, you know, or if they're going to go through some of the forensics. But, you know, one of the things I want to comment on, there's a lot of stuff on 19 and on the internet about Harpootlian not looking prepared, and you know, I'm happy to criticize him, but that's not exactly what I'm seeing. Creighton Warders, their job is to be methodical, know how to work that Elmo, get all that stuff going. Harpootlian is listening. He's trying to find somebody to say something that creates some little hole that he can drive a truck through. His job is not to make sure he's got the Elmo so he can find the document to make a little point. He's listening and hoping he can find a hole, the glove doesn't fit kind of thing, and he's going to be listening through this whole trial looking for those kind of holes. And when he finds one, that's when you're going to see why Harpootlian makes his money.
All right. Thank you so much, former U.S. Attorney Pete Strom. Decades of experience in trials here in Columbia, all over the state. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. Yeah.